think my philosophy is as scared as we are of what we don't know, it is better to just know. It's like, yeah, am I terrified that, this thing isn't working for them? Yes, but it is better for me to ask and to get that honest feedback so that at least we have a chance to fix it.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Brubaker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Mission Driven Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm speaking with the ecosystem mission driven entrepreneurs, innovators, investors, the wider spectrum of individuals who see a challenge outside their window and want to leverage the power of entrepreneurship and innovation. For me, it's all about inspiring and equipping the next generation, but also helping other entrepreneurs through this process or investors understand the entrepreneurship path a little bit better so we can all work together a little bit quicker so we can bring these solutions to a bit better scale. In this episode, I'm extremely happy to be joined by Tiffany Yeh, founder of Tiffany. It's a startup that has developed a product that absorbs body heat, reduces skin temperature by up to 10 degrees Celsius for up to 8 hours, which for me in Southeast Asia, around the world, we're talking about climate change and the impact to, individuals and communities out there in the heat. For me, this is a really interesting product. And so with that, Tiffany, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so it's a bit of introduction. It'd be great to hear a little bit about yourself and the mission that you're on.
Yeah, my name is Tiffany Yeh. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Estia. We make passive cooling materials that protect people from extreme heat. I'll share a little bit about my background. It's very much tied to what the company is today. So I spent my childhood in Taiwan, moved to the States for university. I studied material science, but that's also when I started to do a lot of global health field work. And so twice a year, I'd spend months in different countries around the world, living out of a suitcase or a backpack, and often without electricity, air conditioning, et cetera. And so for like a decade, I thought about like, oh gosh, like I am, overheating in this farming village, and I wish there was something that could cool me down. And then I went off to medical school and thought that I was going to be a surgeon. And it was at the end of medical school where I was applying to residency. And I was like, oh gosh, like maybe I don't actually want to be a surgeon. And so I started playing with cooling materials. Like I put my material scientist hat back on and developed this cooling technology and decided to build it out as Estia.
That's awesome. So, but was there like, I mean, you're out there in the field and you're thinking, okay, I'm hot, like, but was there like a moment or experience that specifically said I need this product, or it was just kind of a longer term, like a consistent, say, exposure to this challenge that you wanted to fix, and then therefore you had a little bit more time, or was it like an immediate, I got to get this done?
It was more that I put ice packs in my clothes a lot and just didn't like the experience. Like I didn't like the fact that I would have to like bring it out from a freezer and then it would melt on me and then I would have to put it somewhere. And so it was definitely more slow burn, but it was because I had a makeshift solution that I was not happy with and it kind of grated on me over time.
It's grading at you over time, but what were like the first steps to pursuing this idea? Because you're in medical school, you're looking at residency, you're probably thinking, I put a lot into that. I need to have some kind of confidence before I make a jump into something. But what were the first steps to pursuing the idea, and how did you start turning to something like real?
I think decision making comes in steps. Like you like take little steps to build confidence and you reach a threshold where you know what to do one way or the other. And so for me, that step building process was, I come home from the hospital, it's the evening or weekend when I have a day off. And here I am in my apartment in Philadelphia, and I'm just like digging through like the academic databases and reading through like anything related to cooling in the literature. I funneled down on a couple different material categories, like types of materials out there that were cooling buildings, or cooling vaccines, et cetera, that I thought were interesting. And then I basically went out and built commercial off-the-shelf representatives of these materials, and I would just wear them and play with them and throw them in the freezer and strap them to myself. And I think from there, you build an intuition for here are the pros and cons for this type of material. Here's where I see potential, but we'd have to tweak it in some way or change the formulation. But the potential is what excited me. And so I landed on a particular type of polymers. I was like, I think I can make this work if I change the designs. And from there, built enough confidence that I could say, hey, like, I find this really exciting. I really want to see this technology in the world actually helping people beyond myself enough so that I'm willing to like cancel residency and actually do this.
Okay, okay. Now I have to ask because I know a lot of Asian families are what they are. You make that decision. What was your parents' reaction to this?
My parents are the best. So I grew up in a doctor's family in Taiwan. My dad's an OB-GYN. I think he always knew that I wouldn't actually follow through with medicine. Like I think he was concerned that I spent so much of my life like flying around the world, living in different communities. And so I think he knew that as much as I loved the OR, it wouldn't satisfy me. And so when I told him that there was this thing that I want to do, he's like, as long as there is something you want to do, then I feel okay with this. Like, go do it. And they actually help me a lot now in terms of like we have supply chain in Taiwan, and so I fly back and forth a lot. But when I'm not there, they actually sometimes help with like emergency firefighting, which is great.
I mean, going back to your early experiences where you were kind of going around different communities and spending time in them, in what ways did that experience, like if you look back, how did those experiences help you, along this path? Not necessarily just for this product, but for yourself and learning how to, empathize, understand your customers, or understand the needs of communities, or just be more open to empathy and like, I need to solve a real problem.
So my first deployment per se was under MIT Global Startup Labs in Sri Lanka. We were there in the Sri Lankan ecosystem. There was a cohort of young professionals who were starting their founder journey. And my job was basically to run through a curriculum with them, be a sounding board, and then basically run a bunch of networking events connecting them with local, like Sri Lankan and Indian investors and ecosystem builders, et cetera. And so I really was more of a facilitator, help them remove roadblocks kind of person. And it's a give or take because in the process of working with these startup founders, I was learning as much about business and operating in the local ecosystem as they were. And so that was actually the first time I too learned about startups. Like it was MIT who trained me in entrepreneurship as they were basically hiring me to translate this in a different setting. So I think I use that as one example. And another one is with MIT D Lab in Zambia. And again, I was more of a facilitator where we were in farmers' villages and we were running through design thinking workshops with local farmers. The goal was we have a design thinking process, but it's we translate this process with them so then they can create their own agricultural equipment, right? Like they know their workflow best. They know the problems best. The best thing that everyone can do is for them to have the mental models, the frameworks to design their own solutions in response to the problems that they encounter themselves. And so I use this as an example where it's not me going in and solving problems for them. It's me going in with a particular angle. They come in with their angle, and together we co-design, we co-create. And it's really about them having the framework to do it themselves. And in that process, you build empathy for each other.
No, it's great. And I mean, I guess from here, I want to know like what is the product itself that you developed, and for those who aren't familiar, like how does it work, or what are some underlying technologies or approaches that kind of enable what it does?
So let me start with the underlying passive cooling technology. And what I mean by that is that we've got a material. I'll show you right here. It's this gel. The way that it cools is that when you put it in contact with something warm, such as the human body, it absorbs the heat from the body and it dissipates that heat out into the environment by evaporating water out of its gel matrix. So the gel is dry to touch, but inside it holds a ton of water. And so it's basically a very sophisticated evaporative cooling mechanism to absorb and dissipate that heat. Now, why do I say passive cooling? That's because the whole point is to be electricity free, right? So over the course of 10 hours, this gel is going to dry out. And the way that you recharge it is by putting it in water. If you're out in a field, throw it in a bucket of water. If you're at home, throw it in the laundry machine. That suffices as soaking it in water to recharge it for its next use.
What is recharging in the sense like, okay, I wear it for 10 hours. I've basically moved my heat from my body or my surface, the surface of my skin to this material. Is recharging in effect cooling it off so it's ready again for to take more heat on, or like what does recharging mean?
I think of it more as like a battery, right? And so, I use my phone. At the end of the day, it's close to zero, and you plug it into an outlet or some mobile charger to like bring the battery back up to 100, right? And so, in that sense, you're using electricity. In this case, it's as if as the gel dries over time, its capacity is going from 100 to zero. You recharge its capacity by letting it absorb water.
beyond that, like what were some other existing solutions that you're looking at, and how is this approach different than some of the others that you looked at or that you actually like your early pilots were?
For sure. So I'll go back and draw that distinction between passive cooling, active cooling. Passive is electricity free. Active is you use electricity in the form of batteries, or maybe as something that requires refrigeration and freezers, which obviously are plugged into an outlet. Use one of our earliest customers as an example, Kajima Construction in Japan, a gigantic conglomerate. They care a lot about worker safety and heat, so much so that a lot of their employees wear fan-powered jackets. So you've got these poopy jackets with batteries inside and a little fan, and it like blows air around. Now, the issue with that, multiple fold. One is you need to recharge the batteries. It's also blowing hot air sometimes if it's too hot outside. And then it's also the cost that comes with the batteries. And so I think what Kajima found very interesting about us was the fact that it's very lightweight. So I'll actually show you a different form factor. Before I showed you kind of like a patch, like a solid slab, but something else we've developed is actually printing the material onto textiles. So these dots here are material, and then cut and sewing that into garments. And so, for example, what we've piloted with Kajima is they wore shirts with the material. And what's compelling for them is it's just like another garment, but with cooling functionality. I wear it, I use it during my shift. At the end of my shift, I take it off, I throw it in the laundry machine, I let it air dry, I wear it again the next day. It doesn't feel like an additional layer, it doesn't feel like additional maintenance. And our whole point is to be as easy to use as possible.
Now you had the two form factors there. Did you start off with that little patch or something similar to it and just cover people with it? Or like how I'm curious, like how do you understand even like how much of the body you have to cover to bring the temperature down? And is it about the core temperature? Is it about the surface temperature? Does that even matter?
The more metabolic load you're generating, the more body surface area we should cover. If you're, just someone walking down the street and cooling yourself off, then we really don't need to cover all of that much. There's a lot of math that goes into this is the cooling capacity of our technology, and we can scale it up or down depending on how much activity that person is under and how much energy they're generating. Now, going back to the properties of the material itself, what I can say is, which in terms that people can easily understand, is that the temperature of the skin in contact drops by around 9 degrees Celsius within the first few minutes of application. And that 9 degrees Celsius differential is sustained for the next around 6 hours. So we make that last the entirety of someone's shift. And as the material dries at the end of that 6 hours, that temperature is going to slowly crawl back to the normal baseline temperature.
Interesting. I mean, the applications are, for me, I think like construction workers, you mentioned military, I could think police, firefighter, like, even all the delivery people now in Asia, they're all on these scooters running around. And I can imagine like this would provide not just a lot of relief for them, but it would also ensure, workforce stability and workforce safety as well. I mean, safety is, I think, the easiest one to say, like, look, they're safer, but in reality, if you're solving for safety, you're also solving for stability and also their ability to operate throughout the day instead of now you see a lot of factories and a lot of construction moving towards the night because it's so hot during the day now. So it's solving a lot of real problems.
Our lens at Estia is like tying it back to people's day to day and how does it impact their life. And so we really see heat stress and the effects of extreme heat on people as both trifold. There's a climate crisis, there's a health crisis, and there's an economic threat. I'll share some statistics. 80% of the global population suffered from extreme heat last year. That resulted in over 500,000 deaths, actually half of which occurred in Asia alone. And then when you're talking about economic impact, heat reduces people's productivity. That leads globally to $2.4 trillion in losses, right? So it's affecting the macroeconomics of countries, but it's also obviously affecting the economics of the person, the worker who is, putting themselves out there as we're trying to get food on the table, whether they're a farmer or they're a logistics worker in terms of deliveries, et cetera.
Yeah, and so from there, what were your early pilot programs? I mean, you mentioned the Japanese construction firm, but were there certain say, use cases that you wanted to go test first, or were you just kind of putting this out, seeing who was the early, where the early interest was coming, and just running with that?
My personal philosophy in like company building is that you have to consciously choose your identity. And so the identity that we've chosen, at least to begin with, is enterprise focused, specifically worker safety. That could mean serving construction workers, that could mean serving shipping port workers, that could mean serving public safety officers, right? Like police or public safety adjacent, like defense operators. But people who, they are doing their job and they are at the mercy of heat in the setting of their job. That is where we decided to begin. Now, where do I see us going in the next 3 to 5 years? And is that there are a lot of people who can also benefit from this in the day to day. And so broaden from enterprise to consumer, probably starting with sports because that is a niche and consumer that we can really focus on. But then really the goal is to get to, working with a very daily apparel brand. And so the average person walking down the street would be wearing this as well.
You mentioned the enterprise in that space. Like, who are your targeted enterprise? Like, how are you executing that? And then how do you build those relationships? And I'm asking more from like the founder's perspective because you're a young founder. This is a new technology. What's that sale look like? What's the relationship development process for you?
I'll start with a model, the business model, and then I'll go into, in a way, how do you generate leads and bring them through the funnel? And so the model is we sell to the enterprises, right? Like we sell to the construction company or the Department of Home Affairs, and they distribute it to their constituents, their employees. Now that brings us to the lead generation, the funnel, et cetera. And that I really think that in the beginning days, you're looking for the early adopters, and it's really like a matchmaking process. Like when you find each other, it's very obvious. Like one, they experience heat. Like you don't have to explain heat to them. They're like, yes, we suffer from heat. And then two, they're motivated. Like they're like, yes, like we have been trying dozens of solutions to protect our workers. None of them suffice. Like this sounds really interesting and compelling. Like when can you deliver? And so the magic just automatically sparks. And so then the question is, how do you find them? I will say part of it is timing. We had to just kind of put ourselves out there. Like there was definitely a phase when I was, like cold emailing and cold calling and some conversations don't go anywhere. But there are some where it's just organic, right? Like with Kajima, I met their innovation lead at San Francisco Climate Week. It was just an introduction at an event, very similar to our other early customer, Mueller Construction Supply. Again, introduced by a friend. We had first the Zoom call, and then I met up with them down in Sacramento when he just firmly, deeply believed in the problem and deeply found the technology interesting. And then we just went from there. And then it's just more about like, you have to keep in touch, right? Like, when in the beginning our project isn't perfect, we bring them a patch and, it's like, what do you think of the patch? And they try it and they're like, we love the material, but we're not sure about the patch. Like, can you turn it into a garment? And this is like a true story. Like that is literally what like Kajima and Mueller did, right? We're like, oh, okay, like let's like try like getting it into textiles. And then we figured out how to get onto textiles and turn it into a shirt or a bandana. And so then they, purchase the shirts and bandanas and they trial it and they give us iterative feedback. And so I think the trust building process is you each do this iterative give and take, knowing that you're both putting your best effort. It's not perfect yet, but let's both work together to get it to perfection for time.
Yeah, I find that really interesting because a lot of times I think entrepreneurs feel it's got to be perfect before a customer would even consider it. But you've kind of found a way to, let's say, iterate, improve, make adjustments with your first customers or with the early adopters. Do you think that that's really unique, or do you think that most people just don't put themselves out there and just be like, "Hey, I'm trying to sell you something that in 2 years is gonna be perfect, but I need to work with you to make it perfect," and then you kind of work your commercial arrangements around that.
I think there are a couple parts to this. Is it emotionally terrifying? Yes, but eventually you get over it. And part of it was I was also trying to learn from the best in hardware. So I'll give a couple of examples. I do think that building hardware has its unique models and challenges, right? Because it's capital intensive, you're going to go through several versions. And so when you look at the electric vehicle space, um, I believe that they took deposits, right? Like they took deposits and then shipped something. So it's like you sell the thing before he's even like fully done. Uh, it's a very similar mentality. And then, the model gets better over time. So for example, for the EV space, they started with a very expensive model. And as they scaled volumes, it became increasingly affordable, but also better. And it's similar to us as well, in that we have invented a material. And in the beginning, in small batches, it's going to be one, like imperfect. You're still figuring out what you don't know. But also, it's going to be the most expensive that it's ever going to be. And so you start with the partners who are willing to pay for this imperfect innovation because they want to stay ahead of the curve. And they're like dying for a solution like this. And then you get to the point where you're increasing volumes, it is reliable, like you know exactly what you're doing. It's about scaling the volumes. And then over time, it's going to be increasingly democratized, increasingly accessible to the rest of the population.
Scaling. What does the next 2, 3, 5 years look like? I mean, I can imagine if you can get a couple police forces, you can get a lot more. If you can get a couple of firefighting houses, you can get a lot more. I mean, how are you approaching it, and what are you doing to set yourself up for that scale that you think is potentially there?
Again, goes back to the unique operations of hardware, materials, et cetera, where you really need a tight and scalable supply chain. And so when I take a step back and think about the overall company journey, it's like this. You start with an intuitive hit. And you think you're a little crazy because you're not actually sure if the science is going to work until you prove it. So you go from a Google Drive to a gel. You're like, great, we have a technology. Now, how do you productize that? And then you go from a gel through a patch and a pocket shirt to like, textile that you then cut and sew into garments. And then you go into this phase of the piloting phase, and that the thing works, but it's not yet perfect, right? You need to fix the durability, the positioning, et cetera. That's when the technology is matured, but the product needs refinement. So you're in this product refinement stage and you're doing small batches. And then you get to a point where you're like, the product is set, ramp up volume, let's go. And your supply chain needs to be able to grow with you in that. And so we're at that point of pilots, you're going to hit inflection, you're going to ramp up, and you need the partners who are going to run with you through that next 3 years or so.
Does that mean that you need to kind of codify what your product will be, the designs will be, or are you trying to kind of nail down a process where it's like, look, send me your 50,000 uniforms, I'll build this in? Because I can almost see where you could have your own, just this is the suit that you put underneath whatever it is that, like whatever your construction uniform or firefighter, like this is the inner shell. But you're talking about like really, sewing that into textiles that you then ship to others. So as part of that ramp and getting that scale, I would imagine having your own inner core shell would be the most efficient way to do this. But is that the way that you're going with it, or are you trying to do both depending upon what customers' requests are, or how do you balance that?
So the way that we think about our technology, and we call Hydrovolt the gel technology, is it's like the Gore-Tex of cooling. Now, where's the secret sauce? It's twofold. The secret sauce is in the gel itself, like what is it made of, its recipe, etc. But the other part is also how do you print it onto textiles? How do you turn it into a solid piece? It's a fabrication, right? And so both of those aspects are core to us, which means that we actually have a lot of versatility in the different types of products and the form factors of those products that we integrate into. There's a lot of room for partnerships there. But what we own in-house, including the manufacturing process, is how do you make the gel and how do you get it onto product?
And that second part, does that mean that you're creating machinery that does this, and therefore you can sell the machines and the gel, and therefore you can sell, you can send these products to, big mill houses so they can apply it? Or does that mean that you're going to try and bring uniforms into your house and apply it there so that way you can kind of control/protect your IP?
It's more the latter. Yep. So it's either we bring in what we need to print on, we do the printing, or we co-design something where we print a module and then we then integrate that printed module with whatever uniform they have.
Okay, okay. Yeah, because I can see where a lot of supply chains, from VF to, work uniforms, they would love to have this as part of their process and just make it a lot easier and a lot faster. But that becomes, well, both a business opportunity, but also a business risk to you guys, right? Because the IP leakage might be something you worry about in the application of this gel.
My other perspective there is that the production line is actually quite complicated. And so it's actually quite a bit of capital investment to get the right production line up and running. And my sense is that it would actually be advantageous for all parties for the production line to be centralized by the company that knows how to do it. Otherwise, whatever partners they have would need to go through the effort of, well, first the capital investment of procuring this production line, but then all the learning that goes into how to run it. And I'm not sure that it would be worth it for them either.
I mean, it's fascinating because you're developing two things at once. As you mentioned, like you had the gel and you had the application. The gel you can patent. Can you patent the application as well? Like, is there ways to make to like protect yourselves there, or is that something that you just the way you protect yourself is like just to keep it close to you?
For in the material science space, in general, some things are patentable, but a lot of things are actually trade secrets. That's just general to material science and chemistry. Patents, the way we think about patents, like it's like you have to have them, but they're only one tiny part of your overall IP strategy and your technical moat. And so for both the formulation, the application, et cetera, we broadly construe them in our patents, but a lot of details are left to the company itself. Not that we're as complicated as semiconductor chips, but I like using the analogy of semiconductor chips in that it's so intricate and there's so many steps in the fabrication. And if you mess any one thing up, it kind of ruins the whole chip. It's like that, when you're like making a material. I mean, semiconductor chips also have a lot of materials and components in them. So I like to think of it that way, and that you have a lot of steps, and you need the investment and the training, et cetera, to get it all right.
All right, I want to shift a little bit into your own entrepreneurial journey here. You've clearly been forced to learn a lot, and you've grown through this. What has been this journey for you since, the minute that you realize like this, I want to pursue this, there's a solution here. I mean, irrespective of the business or the commercialization, like there's a problem to be solved, and I'm going to use entrepreneurship to solve it with this material. What has the journey been like for you? Because over this time, I mean, it's been a few years. Like you've had to learn a lot, you've had to achieve a lot, you've had to go through all the stages. What's the journey been for you, and what are some things when you look back were like kind of critical to where you are now? Like, what are some of the early lessons that you're glad you learned, or experiences you're glad you went through that really helped you like set a foundation for being an entrepreneur?
Yeah. The first step is choosing entrepreneurship as the right way to get the job done. For me, business wasn't necessarily the default, right? Like I trained as like a medical, public health, et cetera, engineer person. And so when I looked at this problem set, it's like, okay, we're tackling extreme heat. We've got a technology that is novel but scalable. Now, the most sustainable way to deliver this technology to the world at scale is to build it as a business that can more than pay for itself. So that is the fundamental, like first principle underlying the organization, that the best way to get this technology in the hands of the people who need them, as many as possible, in the most efficient and longstanding manner is to build it as a business. Now, when you've got that clear, then you know your why. And so when things get hard, you know exactly why you're building this business. It's like, I'm building this venture because this is the best way forward to solve the problem for as many people out there as possible.
What has the hard times been like so far for you? What were some of the early ones that like, Jesus, I'm not sure, but I got the why. We're gonna keep going.
Yeah, I think in the really early days is you have to prove that the thing can be real. So that goes back to what I said earlier about like that step between going from a Google Drive to then a gel. It's just, I mean, personally, I found it hard to get substantial financing at that stage because there was a lot of scientific risk. They're like, I don't know, man, it's just you and your brain and this Google Drive you talk about, like, prove it to us, right? So the first I had to prove the science. And then after proving the science, you have to like prove that it can turn into a real product. So I think the first type of problem that you have is like you kind of have to like prove it to the doubters that this thing can be real. And like in that process, you also have your own self-doubt. So you just kind of like have to chug through. And it's a bit of a lonely process. But you get through it. And then the next set of problems that you have is more like operational. It's like, oh gosh, we have so much work to do, right? We have orders to deliver on. We have, technical troubleshooting to fix. We've got supply chain to build. And then it's all like, in a way, like champagne problems, where it's like we're trying to build this as fast as possible, in a good way.
Yeah, yeah. But you're a solo founder, so how do you take all that on? Or have you found, a number two, number three, number four to like specifically take on things that you're uncertain about, you don't like doing, they're the experts in, like how do you build the people around you to make sure that you're not trying to do it all yourself?
Yeah. So I started as a solo founder, but halfway through the journey, I met my other half. And I love the like the meet cute per se of our co-founder journey, where I was actually exploring public safety applications, right? So that goes back to, you're building the technology, but you're also figuring out how to build this as a business. And so how do you go to market? And so I was looking into public safety, and a friend was like, oh, like I know someone who's out wild and firefighting in Oregon. Like, do you want to speak to this guy, Jack? And Jack was just so well, first of all, he really resonated with the problem of extreme heat because he previously was in like the US Special Forces. And so he saw a lot of his colleagues go down because of heat. So, one, really close to the problem. And two, being like, hey, this approach is new. You just need a little bit of water, lightweight, carry in your bag. Like, this could really do it for our guys. And then three, over time, you work together and you realize that you really gel and you're both very passionate about the problem. You team up. Now, I use that as an example because that is kind of the litmus test that we have for everyone on our team, right? Like everyone is just so mission aligned. Like even if they're not a former military operator themselves, maybe they have some hobby that brings them out into the field. They love hiking, they love animals, they're volunteering in the mountains, and they're like, gosh, like heat is real. And here's our chance to help people, adapt to this changing climate. And so, I guess maybe the one piece of advice, if I were to give advice, is find people who, one, like are really mission aligned. So when things get hard, you know exactly why you're building what you're building. And then along with that, you like share the same values. You share company values, but you also share values as people, and you just genuinely have fun and enjoy working together.
That's great. I mean, the only follow-up I have to like your hiring strategy is like, how much do you then care about, say, their technical skills, or do you view get the mission first, then we can train them up and bring them in, or do you bring in mission specialists? You're like, okay, they're not 100% on the same mission that we are, like they're 80% aligned, but they're 100% the technical that we need.
I'll bring in a third variable where the one thing you don't compromise on is values alignment. And values alignment is not the same thing as mission alignment, right? Like mission alignment is like how bought in are they specifically to heat? And I think, like Jack, Connor, our chief of staff, and I are like obsessed about heat. Now, there are like members on the team who don't necessarily experience heat as closely, but they like believe in the mission. Now, where they have to be 1,000% is the values alignment of like integrity, like diligence, like impact on the world. So that's where there's like absolutely no room to compromise. Now, when it comes back to your first point about like technical ability, I think that goes to everyone has a different role in the company. What our lab technician knows how to do and can do is not the same thing as what our business development people know how to do and can do. Sometimes they actually have very little overlap in their skill sets, but that's exactly why they're in the roles that they're in. So we need to fit people need to fit their spot in the organization, or you find the place in an organization that fits them. And then it's about here's a baseline, and then we can grow over time together, knowing that we share the same passion and the same values and the desire to grow into these roles over time.
Speaking of kind of growing, your personal growth, I mean, you may share internally, but you actually you shoulder a lot more of the burden sometimes as the founder or as the co-founder. outside the organization, how do you yourself grow? Like, do you go to, I mean, you mentioned the climate week. How often are you going to events? What's the role of mentors? How are you continuing to ensure like that you are supported, not just by your team, but on the wider level, so that as you're going through this experience, you're not just making better decisions, but that you're also taking care of yourself along this path as well.
Maybe the first thing that I'll say is that, you know, my job, this company, they're a very big part of my life, but they're only one part of my life. And I think it's super important to remember that, right? Because it keeps you level headed in times of high stress and in times of like high stakes decision making. Now, in light of that, I think that's where there are two sets of mentors, and one that's much more structured for me, like my personal mentors from the days before I started this company. They keep you staying because they know who you are. They saw you as a medical student. They saw you when you were 18 as a college student. They saw you in a different job. In the role of this company, I think in the process of operating the company, you find champions and you learn from each other. And so, to be honest, I would actually say, like, who I would consider to be a mentor is actually sometimes like the internal champions within the larger organization that is our customer, because they know their organization, they know their industry, they have 40 years of experience that I don't. They can teach me about the industry and about how to understand this enterprise and how to understand this motion.
Like, I mean, you mentioned, and it's been said before, like it's a lonely path sometimes, but it's like learning to actually be open to those conversations, be open to, yeah, and have these anchored individuals in your life who what my wife would call like emotional equity in your success and your failure. Like those are the people, they'll come in and they'll give you advice, and you'll not just trust it, but actually it's well intentioned. It's often more focused because they have that timeline with you. But then you have all the others who are like on a technical thing or on a business or like something more acute. It's like I know I can draw off these individuals, or I can go ask them if needed. Like I need a little bit of help here, and that's another like really helpful thing to have. But a lot of times, kind of that terrifying moment of the ask will prevent entrepreneurs from making those requests or to opening themselves up to that conversation.
I think my philosophy is, as scared as we are of what we don't know, it is better to just know. It's like, yeah, am I terrified that, this thing isn't working for them? Yes, but it is better for me to ask and to get that honest feedback so that at least we have a chance to fix it. And maybe that's part of the building the relationship, right? Like building the trust in each other, and that I trust you to tell me what's working and what's not working. And you trust me to put my best 1,000% effort forward to do it right.
That is a fantastic approach to I've had a lot of like that is a really good way of putting it together. It's like at least I know where I need to focus and to fix, and and having and that takes a lot of trust to like even get to that point with your customers or with your team as well, because your team, you as the founder may not always get it right. Hey, tell me where I'm going wrong, and then we'll work on it together. I mean, that mindset or that tool set, it really applies to so much more. All right, so as a kind of a wrap up, you have a younger version of yourself who's looking at entrepreneurship as a potential tool to solve the problem that they see in the world. I'm not saying that they're getting ready to come out of grad school and make that same decision, but like they're coming out of school, they're early in their career. One or two or three pieces of advice you give to that young entrepreneur as they're looking at, should I make this jump, or should I go into a career, or how do I bring my idea to the world?
Maybe the first point that comes to mind is um, know your why. It's a very personal decision whether to build a company. And the reason why I say build a company is that you're choosing this every day. And every day you get to choose, I'm doing this or I'm not doing this anymore. Um, and so I think first to get clear on like what is it that they want? Why is it that they would want to build this thing? Do they want to build it as a company? Does being a founder fit into their life path, at least for the stage or maybe forever? Who knows? But to do a lot of that internal reflection, maybe that like that's the first piece, right? Like zero judgment, just figure out if this is right for you. And then maybe the second piece is surround yourselves with good people, no compromises on that. Along the way, you're going to meet a lot of people. Some relationships are going to come and go, and it's going to get hard. And so I think being patient and having the discernment to know, sometimes I'm going to wait until I find the right ones. And if it's not right, I'm going to let it go because I'm making space for the right ones.
Yeah, I've started 6 groups now. And the most recent one, that second part, the surround myself with good people. I had great people a couple different times. I just didn't know how to manage them over the time. Like I'd never had a failure of any kind, but I really came away with like, wow, the team dynamic is so important to the success of the organization, the mission, the entrepreneur, like however you want to frame that. And oftentimes you kind of it's easy. It's one of the easier things to take for granted because the entrepreneur thinks that they're so far out there and everyone's following them. It's like, no, actually, you're all walking together on this one.
Oh, totally. Like, how much grace do they hold for me? You know? Um, I mean, there's always a balance in leadership in that, yes, do you need to hold the fort? Do you need to rally people behind the star? Do you need to stay strong? Yes. But I think in all of that requires a lot of vulnerability. There are so many times when I'm just like, guys, like, I'm stressed. Like, I'm worried about this thing. But also, you balance that with like, this is what's going on in my head. And rationally speaking, these are the different scenarios that this could play out. And I think it's that, again, it goes back to trust. When you have that trust, you can tell each other, set the tone, be like, this is where I'm at today, but then this is how we move forward together. And when you balance that, you can know where you all are at and then also operate effectively. And that's just being human. And you know that you're doing it together.